Though intentions can be made very clear, now I think I know what I feel.
Hello, it's me, and today I want to talk about inspiration in writing. In my previous video, I've talked about inspiration in general, and today I want to take these three things which I said I believe to be the components of inspiration and try to apply them to the writing process and try to figure out how exactly inspiration works in writing. Of course, I'm only using my own experience, so I'm not saying that this is how it works every single time with every writer. I'm just trying to figure it out for myself and to make a video that is based on my experience and my thoughts, and I hope that it will be helpful to you in one way or another. So, like I've said in my previous video, I believe that inspiration consists of three things: knowing what to do, feeling how to do it, and having a desire to do it at the moment. And I believe that they're all important, but probably in writing this first question, what to do, is the most important. In the past and even in the present, I often find myself staring at a blank page or at the writing that I've already made when I need to continue writing or when I need to start writing and I just feel no desire to write. And only then I realize that it is because I just don't know what to write next, or even worse, that the writing that I've done before wasn't right, so I don't know how to get out of this situation. So it oftentimes happens to discovery writers or mixed types like myself when you feel like having a single idea for a story is enough to start writing the story. And probably it is, but this single idea only gives you as much information as a logline of a film that you see at the website of the cinema theater. Gives you information about this movie that you're about to watch. Of course, you may assume what this movie will be about, you may guess its plot, but you probably won't be able to create the script that would be as developed as this script in 1 hour before the show starts. All feature films, as much as I understand, according to this Hollywood standard and to Blake Snyder, they all have about 40 scenes, and novels, I think, have usually even more scenes. So in order to write one story, we have to have at least 40 ideas. And those ideas shouldn't be generic, they shouldn't be shallow, they have to be specific, they must have character and depth, and they have to be our ideas. They have to be something that is deeply connected to us, I think. Otherwise, what's the point of writing the story? It wouldn't be original. So, of course, all of the ideas come from our head, but I just don't think that they happen to be in our head for no reason. There are always sources of this idea, there is also a material. And also, I often compare this writing without having enough ideas with trying to watch a movie or a video on YouTube when you have very bad 3G internet, when you have to stop every 2 seconds for the rest to load. And I often feel like that when I don't have enough ideas. So you have to have ideas and you have to have sources of these ideas. And I believe that the first and the most important source of the ideas is your own experience, because even though you don't have the literal experience of everything that you write about, especially me, since I write fantasy. However, because I think that your story has to be personal, it has to have something to do with your experience and with the ideas and thoughts that comes from your experience. So I don't think that you have to be wise or that you have to have a lot of experience. I generally think that the amount of experience and even the quality of experience isn't as important as your ability to learn from this experience and to find some new ideas in this experience. So I guess we can all train ourselves to start seeing ideas in the situation that happens to us and to look for the paradoxes, for something interesting. And when I had some adventures in my life, or when I had some more active life than right now during the quarantine, I would have a journal and I would write things that were happening so that I wouldn't forget them. And it helped me gather the ideas and just remember them better. And also I have this notebook where I gather the ideas about the concrete stories. Actually, I used to have different notebooks for different stories, but then I realized that when I'm trying to be neat, it slows down my thinking. Also, you can't carry 8 notebooks with you every day. So I bought one notebook that I didn't even like aesthetically that much, so I wasn't afraid to write in it. And I started to write all of the ideas that concern all of my fantasy stories, which are connected but they're not the same story. So I would usually write a date and the story that it concerns, and I start writing down my ideas. Later I reread this notebook and I can write my thoughts about where it should go, draft some outlines, etc. I think that it helps me very much. And I know that Stephen King doesn't like notebooks because he thinks that it's a great way to gather your bad ideas, but I think that maybe he was talking about the general idea of the story, and I guess I agree with him. However, I think that it is important to gather those 40 ideas, or as many as your story needs. And also there is another side to this knowing what to do, is not only knowing the events of your story, but also knowing how to structure it. So I really like reading the books on story structure while I'm working on my stories, while I'm writing, and especially when I'm stuck. And my favorite book on story structure is Robert McKee's Story. I think that it have given me the most of all of those books, the most understanding of the principles of story writing, and probably the deepest understanding of it. I mean, the deepest out of all of these books that he gave me. However, when I was reading Save the Cat by Blake Snyder, it made me think about the likability of my characters and whether or not they're relatable. And when I was reading Write Your Novel from the Middle by James Scott Bell, I would start thinking about the middle of my story. So I think that the more good books on story structure you read, the more unexpected views on your story you have, and this is a good thing. And these two things, I think, really help you find the answer to the question what to do. The second question, how to do it, and I think that the answer to it has at least 3 sides. The first side of this answer is your writing style. My own solution to the problem of the style of the writing style is very plain and obvious. When I feel like my style is lacking something, I usually read something that is written in a style that has what my style is lacking, and I don't read it before I start writing, but I read it over the same period of time. So when I felt like my writing wasn't poetic enough, I started to read more good Ukrainian contemporary poetry. Also, there is another side to this question, to this answer: character voice. I think that it is one of the most difficult parts of writing, and my answer is probably more theoretical, because Robert McKee says that if you have 6 months to write your script, then the first 4 months you have to work on the plot structure, on the work with the characters, and by the time you start writing it in the last 2 months, you will know your characters and you will know everything about your character that you need to give them this unique voice. And I think that it's a very interesting piece of advice. However, I haven't read his dialogue yet, so I wonder what else has he got to say about it. But it's a very interesting piece of advice, and I don't follow it exactly because I like discovering the character voice as I try to write, because I feel like there are certain nuances of the character that I can't just make up theoretically. However, that is something that I sometimes remember, this piece of advice, because when I feel like there is something wrong with how my character sounds and expresses themselves, then I usually stop and try to understand what exactly do I not know about them that they don't sound right. And the third side of this question or of this answer is feeling the atmosphere of the scenes that you're writing, and also feeling the world that you're writing. I think that it is very important to know your world, especially if it's a fictional world. You have to know it well enough to imagine it when you write it and to be confident in it. When I was younger, I had this problem with world building, that I either didn't know anything when I started writing and I would try to discover it as I go, and usually it got me stuck in my writing, or I would try to tell the reader everything I know about this world, and that was boring and a lot of information that my reader didn't need. So then I realized, and I came to the conclusion that many writers come to when they become older and more experienced, is that there are two different things: what you know about your world and what you write about your world. And I realized that detailed world building is really great. I overdo it, I guess, a little bit, because recently I have made a drawing of a king who was ruling the kingdom that my characters will visit about 150 years after he dies, so maybe it wasn't necessary. However, I feel like this deep understanding of your world, of your history, of your geography is very important. And also, I remember that when I was younger, I had a more vivid imagination and I could imagine certain things, certain worlds more easily. And now I feel like I need to create some visual material, and I can create some visual material. So sometimes I just draw the maps that don't look very professional or very good, but I just draw them for myself to try to understand how geographically this world works. Or I try to make the plans or blueprints of my buildings and just make the drawings of my buildings and draw the characters and just catch the general atmosphere, because I think that this visual information has a lot to do with this atmosphere. And I feel like this detailed world building is very good when I have to write every particular scene, because, well, I know how this forest works, I know how the character must feel when he enters this forest, I know how the nature looks like in the eastern north part of my world. I understand this geography, so of course I have to make up a lot when I start writing the atmosphere of every particular scene, but at least I have something to start from. And of course, when I write every particular scene, I try to use this approach when you try to imagine it very vividly, what is going on. So you try to imagine the colors, the sounds, how it feels physically. So is it warm, is it cold, and etc. So you have to imagine yourself being inside of this scene. So I don't know how deeply you have to dive into this world building and imagination of your own world, but I think that you have to be very confident and understand what's going on to write something that gives this full feeling of this time and place and of the scene. But what to do if you know what to write and when you feel how to write it, but you just don't want to write it? I think that at this point it might be time to ask yourself a couple more questions. So first of all, I think that sometimes we may lose our desire not only to write but to do anything, and it doesn't have anything to do with our creativity, with our art or inspiration. There are certain circumstances of our lives and there are certain states where we can find ourselves when we just don't have a desire to do anything. So I think that if you feel this way, not just about your book, then maybe you should try to find the reason and to address this issue. It may be related to your health, or it may be related to some circumstances of your life. It's not that I think that you should only write when you are completely healthy and put together. I don't think so. I think that it is possible to create in every state. However, I just think that sometimes certain circumstances may just limit our writing abilities and take away some of our enthusiasm about writing or about anything. So the thing that I'm going to say next, it doesn't concern this situation when you just don't want to do anything. So if it's not this situation, and if you want to do something, if you want to write something but you just don't feel like writing your story at the moment, then probably you should ask yourself another question. That is something that Robert McKee had written about in his book Story, and I have read it in translation, so I don't know how exactly it sounded originally in English, but he said that you should only write a story that you believe in, or the story that you believe. The thing is that it is very important to ask yourself this question of whether or not you believe in your story, in a sense that do you actually believe that world is like that, like what you're telling in your story, and whether or not you actually like this story, whether or not it's sincere to you. Actually, when I had read this part of the book, of the story, I realized how deep is it and how honest this theory is, because I was a little bit skeptical before I started reading this book, because I thought that, well, what if it's just about creating successful scripts that will sell? But it's not. It's about the honest art of storytelling. You have to write what you believe in. You have to write what you believe. And another question that I would ask myself would be, would I want the story to be written even if I'm not the one to write it? And I can answer about my current story, about my current work in progress, is yes, it would be very painful if somebody else did it, but I would want it to exist. And I'm talking about it in this manner because over the course of this almost 14 years that I've been writing, I have given up a lot of stories, and I don't regret it, because even though I might have believed them, I might have believed in them when I started writing them, but then something changed about my worldview and I didn't believe in it anymore. And sometimes it was just that I wanted to write this story, but I didn't want to tell this story. Those are different things. So not all stories exist to be told to the world. Some stories exist to teach us how to write. Other stories exist to teach us how to create our own creative worlds. Or some of them just exist for us to express our feelings. And those are all great things. So I wouldn't say that it's not successful if you haven't finished your story. So I think that if you're not tied by some kind of a contract, there is nothing wrong with giving up the story that you no longer believe in and just try to write something else. However, if you still want to write this exact story, if you would want it to be written and you just don't feel like writing at the moment, then I think that the reasons for it might be your perfectionism, or just that you are tired, lack of energy, or that you are disappointed in your own writing abilities. And I think that what helps me with all of those three things are these things. First is writing challenges and writing marathons. I really like to forget about my doubts for some period of time and give up my perfectionism temporarily, and just focus on writing every day. And during this NaNoWriMo, even though I don't have an intention to win it, but I have an intention to write every day during this marathon. And it really shifts the way I see my writing. and it's very useful. Also, why I like writing marathons is that because they're temporary. So I don't understand how exactly people who manage to write every day because I really need to take breaks from writing and from reading my own stories, because I think that another important thing about your desire to write is having a clear view of your story. So I would say that it's important to take breaks, not just from writing but from editing, from reading your own story. I mean, don't reread this first chapter as if it's going to change anything, because you're not going to see it clearly anymore. Another thing which I think helps with this clear view and with your desire to write is when you read it to someone who likes your story in general. And I'm not saying that who doesn't have any criticism, but someone who is interested in this genre and someone who is interested in you writing a good book, is not going to discourage you from writing at all. So I think that even if it's a person who can't give any professional writing advice, if they're not a writer, for example, but if they find your book interesting, if they can share their thoughts with you as a reader, I think that it can really give you the fresh view on your story, and it will also make you feel less lonely in your writing, because when you're lonely then you stop thinking clearly. Well, if you're too lonely at least. So it really helps sharing your story with people who are interested in it. And the other thing which helps me with my desire to write is, well, first of all, it's my notebook, which I've talked about already, and another thing is something that Roy Peter Clarke, I think, mentioned in his writing tools. He said that at some point that if you are procrastinating from writing, then maybe you should turn this time of procrastination into time of rehearsal of what you're going to write. So you have to rehearse in your head what you're going to write in the future. So it had been helpful for me a couple of times when I couldn't write at the moment and when I wouldn't write at the moment, but where I would rehearse in my head. And by the time I got to writing, I was overwhelmed with these ideas, and I had so many ideas that I felt like I need to write it down, and it really improved my desire to write. So I think that having this notebook that I have really helps me, because oftentimes I just start writing the scenes when I'm writing down my thoughts and my ideas about a certain story, and when you feel like you don't have to write but you can't help writing because you have too many ideas, that really improves your desire to write. Of course, there are just a couple of things that can help you get this desire to write, and there are much more, but the video is getting pretty long and I think that I won't be able to cover all of them anyway. So I really hope that this video was interesting to you or helpful, and I'd like to hear about your own experience with writing and with the writing marathon that is happening right now. So thank you for watching, and I'd like to hear from you, and goodbye.
Just because you didn't love me doesn't mean that you are bad. Just because you made me suffer doesn't mean I should be mad. Just because you're great and handsome doesn't mean that I must have you. Just because my heart still aches now doesn't mean there ain't